Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Future Ready Leadership. My guest today is Pat Tomlinson, the CEO of Mercer. Pat, thank you for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me, Jacob.
All right, so we have quite a few topics we want to get to today, but before we jump into some of those, there have been a few news stories that have been coming out lately and some conversations that have been happening online about the idea of working too hard, working too much, work ethic. There was one story that came out fairly recently by an academic who put out an article basically saying that he's worried that a lot of AI companies out there, especially startups, are moving to a 996 workplace culture where you're working 9 to 9, 6 days a week. And it's funny because sometimes when I talk to business leaders, they say it's very easy for an academic to tell a business leader how much they should be working. It's very easy for an academic to say, well, after 40 hours, you get diminishing returns and things of that nature. But the challenge is a lot of these academics aren't the ones building the products. They're not the ones building the services. They're not the ones running the companies. So I wanted to hear from your perspective as the CEO of a large organization. First, tell us how many employees you have, how big the company is, and how hard have you had to work to get to where you are? What sacrifices have you had to make? How many hours are you putting in? Has it always been 32, 40 hours a week for you? Just be honest about what it takes to get to the highest level inside of an organization so that people get it.
Okay. Well, thanks for that question. So a little bit about Mercer in terms of size of organization and things like that. So we have 23,000 people around the world. We are a HR and investment professional services company, pretty much advising organizations on their human capital, their benefits, and their investment strategies. Focused a lot around defined benefits, defined contributions, so pension type plans, and some nonprofits, insurance, and wealth manager type companies around institutional investment strategy. So we're pretty much in all in the regions of the world. So we've got colleagues that pretty much service clients. So what really takes for us, and as I think about that question before I go to my personal component of it, is a lot of how we think about work, and especially in a professional services environment, really becomes about who are your clients, what do your clients need, how often do they need you to be on, what's the impact that we need to have for them. Depending on which industry we're servicing, we actually wind up working very, very different hours and different complexity. Depends on if there's peaks and valleys and those type of activities. So that's kind of how we would think about it as we would be planning the type of activity, and that's what typical professional services or consulting looks like. Really flexing to the demands of a client. I've been in the HR and investment professional services industry for almost 30 years. And I think you teed this up well. Clearly, to be able to move through organizations and provide a lot of client impact, you have to be flexible, and you can take a lot of various sacrifice to be able to deliver on big projects, to win work originally when you're kind of going ahead and helping clients with major challenges and transformations as they're going through their evolution. And it's always been dependent upon what the client needs. It's kind of what it's become about. In consulting, it has never been a 9 to 5 or an 8 to 6 or a 40-hour work week. I think every work week winds up being different based
Yep.
upon either what we need and the cyclicality of what we're providing to clients. We spend a lot of time, and my background has predominantly been in HR consulting, which has some cyclical needs to it. Typically, at year-end processes and with compensation cycles and benefit cycles and things like that, there's a lot more demand placed on the clients, and hence a lot more demand placed on us as consultants and being able to help them and serve their constituents. So it's kind of been an up and down type of activity. A lot of travel comes involved in it, and people have different components of travel depending on how they do the work, and that's where a lot of the sacrifices come in. Time away from family, making sure that you can go ahead and get to where clients need you to be. Make sure you can balance the different needs of a variety of clients, because our firm, we typically aren't servicing one client at a time for a period of 6 to 12 months like many firms are. We've got a series of clients that each of our colleagues support. I grew up in a similar environment. And so you've got to be able to balance what clients needs, and you have different clients at the same time, and being able to make sure you work with the whole team
Yeah. Yeah.
to be able to do that.
How many hours are you putting in every week?
Now,
Yeah.
I leave my house at 5 a.m. and I get home at around between 7 and 8.
Okay.
So, I mean,
I
I
know,
I don't really think about it in terms of hours. I just think about it. And, I spend a lot of time on the road as well. So on the road, you do wind up being able to work even longer because
yeah.
you
No. I've had many,
you
many
work.
CEOs that I've had on the podcast tell me they work harder as CEOs than they did in any other role and function that they had.
Uh,
And I think it's important for people to level set that if you want to become an executive or a leader inside of an organization, especially now there's this big debate between working in the office or working from home. And I always tell people that if you have aspirations of getting into a leadership role, then you want to be in the office where people can see you, where you can get time with your leaders, and you're going to have to put in extra time, extra hours, make sacrifices. And not a lot of people like to hear that message of the importance of working hard to get to the level that you want to get. Now, of course, if you don't have those aspirations and you don't care about being a senior executive or a CEO, by all means, work 30 hours a week. But if you want to lead a company and you want to build something great, you're not going to be able to do it on 32 or 40 or 50 or maybe even 60 hours a week. And that's just the reality of what it is. And
yeah,
so I'm
I think
glad that
I think
you're
that's good
honest.
advice. I think that's
Yeah.
good advice. The other component I would add in there, even for people who don't want to be CEO, even as they develop through their career, is the advantage of this in office time, which is kind of what you're hitting on, Jacob. Um, is simply most of us don't have giant training programs that you send somebody off to for 3 months to learn. You really learn through this apprenticeship model at work, at least, especially in knowledge-based businesses, like a consulting firm is going to be. So, learning as you go and working more directly, and we do definitely see that the closer people work in proximity, the more they can learn, and the more investment that it will help accelerate and advance their development, provide more value to clients, and usually that means going to enhance their career and accelerate their career development as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the big trends that we're seeing in the workplace today. One of them that keeps coming about, Elon Musk is talking about it, a lot of people are talking about it, is birth rates. Not just birth rates in the United States, birth rates in different countries around the world. I think in the United States, what is it, 1.59 is the current replacement rate. And it should be, I believe, at 2.1,
2.1.
meaning, yeah, meaning that on average, for people not familiar with the concept, is that, as the workforce ages, as people pass away, on average, every woman needs to have 2.1 children to account for the people that are passing away. And right now we're at 1.59, which I think is one of the lowest rates we've ever had, and there's no signs of it turning around. And so a lot of business leaders are trying to figure out, well, what does this mean for business? What does this mean for our workforce? Because obviously people are going to have to be in the workforce longer. The retirement age, retirement, like my dad just retired recently at 72 years old,
Okay.
right? Even though you can technically retire at 59 and a half. So the workforce is becoming longer. We're going to have fewer people. Can you talk about how are you thinking about longevity? How are you thinking about the replacement rate? Like what is the big picture impact that you're paying attention to and how it's going to relate to the workforce?
Yeah. Thanks for that. And let me start that. The way we talk about this is longevity risk, right? So, and we do a bit of research with the World Economic Forum around longevity economy. Uh, and really what that comes down to is this component of before you get to the fertility rate and the birth rate, it gets to this component of people just living longer, right? So that's the
Yeah.
first avenue of what this is going on, right? And so let's maybe talk about what do we mean by longevity risk. On average, we're going to live 10 years longer than our parents. We're going to live 20 years longer than our grandparents. That's on average. About 1 in 6 Americans today are over the age of 65. All right. So while you have that going on and you've got people aging, I think you've teed this up well around fertility rates declining, right? So you've got that component. And I think by 2033, the Congressional Budget Office predicts that there'll be more people who will die in the United States than will be born, right? So at that point, you'll start to see. So at some point in the next decade, you'll start to see this component of declining economy, of declining population, absent any kind of immigration changes and things like that. If we start to think about how immigration impacts just natural births and natural deaths inside of the country. So additionally, what we've got is there's three major components of how we think about this and how I think about this each day and how we work with clients around longevity risk, right? The first one is around health, right? So we start to think about the fact that people who live longer simply will have more health or age-related illness and disease and will consume more healthcare, right? So that's a big component of this. All right. What that does for all of us, not just the older population that's aging and tying up the healthcare, it ties up capacity in the system, and it's going to limit access to care for everyone just by tying up excess capacity in the system. What that also does is it impacts the quality of care that everyone gets because it's harder to get access to care faster. And typically, the most important thing for quality care is to get to right provider as soon as possible in your diagnosis process, right? So we do a lot of this health-related consulting with clients on how to set up their benefit plans for this. So, and what that eventually does is it drives up the cost. And that has a big impact on employers, on governments. This is not a U.S. phenomenon, by the way. I mean, U.S., which I think will probably be most of where we have our conversation today. I've been to 22 countries in the last 18 months, and healthcare comes up almost universally in the conversations with clients. And what kind of supplemental care should employers be thinking about for their workforces, even where there is socialized medicine, right? So it is a very common global challenge. The other big challenge that comes up from people aging more, and then having a challenge on just healthcare consumption, is strictly this component of as people age and family members take care of them, if you think about it that way, it pulls people out of the workforce, right? So it's going to have another impact. And many times this might have been healthcare workers. So it's really going to impact it from that perspective. So that's the first big piece that we think about it is people aging. Next thing is that people live longer. They're going to tend to outlive their retirement. That is a very big challenge, right? So the average person will outlive their retirement by about 12 years. Depends on the country, but most of the large major countries in the world, advanced economies, that's about the right number. It's about 12 years. It is more impactful for women, right? So women, it tends to be longer. In some places, it's as many as 19 years for women, right? That's from a combination of things for women. They tend to earn a bit less than men through their working lives. They have more time out of the workforce. We call that workforce density of time and work because they take care of families and things like that. So they step out of the workforce at bits of periods. And then the third part is they just live longer than men on average, right? So they've got to save for longer periods of time. So this is a real challenge as well, that the public systems will have to step in because people will be out of their own private retirement savings before that time. And then the last part is the fact that we're going to have fewer workers, right? If the population is starting to decline, people are aging, less birth rate. You hit this at the beginning with your fertility rate, with less people being born, even though people are living longer. So they're living longer, but less people coming in behind them to fill into the workforce. You have more people retired, and now you have a smaller working population that's going to go ahead and create GDP and economic growth for an aging population. And most governments in the world have these programs set up around pay-as-you-go programs to pay for elder health care, public retirement systems. And now you have fewer workers generating less tax dollars, paying for more people who are over toward retirement. So that's kind of the big dynamic that we're up against when we think about this.
Yeah, it's a lot of things going on. So when you think about those three things in the context of work, for a lot of people who are listening and watching to this, business leaders, CHROs, executives, it seems like broadly speaking, what this means is that war for talent is going to be even harder. It's going to be harder to find people. It's going to be harder to put people in roles. I mean, is that broadly speaking what all these three things mean? Because we already talk about a talent war now, And that's without even the context of the aging population, without birth rate, without healthcare and taking care of people. So this is going to compound that even more so. So this will be, it seems like, the biggest business trend that organizations need to pay attention to, maybe even more so than just AI specifically, or more so than any other individual trend that's out there. Is just the people and what's happening on that level.
Yeah, now this doesn't move as fast, so that's the one thing. So,
Yeah.
like, this will be a much longer play as we think about it. You know, but I do think that access to talent and making sure you have the right skill talent, because you hit on AI as well, with technologies coming into place, how companies integrate AI and technology into the work and kind of make that seamlessly work together with the workforce that you do have to make sure you're continuing to get the productivity that you need will be critical.
Hmm.
But I definitely think that making sure you have access to the right people. So you think about how you hire them. Once you find the right people, make sure you continue to build their skills, because the skills are going to have to evolve and they're going to have to develop with you as an organization. The concept that there will always be this unending supply of talent out there to go attract in to backfill voluntary turnover will start to get more challenged. And then actually, I think you're going to have to really think about colleague value propositions and kind of this component of how do I keep employees truly engaged around how to make sure that I'm getting they're giving the maximum in for the clients, for the organization, to maximize the benefit, because you're going to have fewer, you're just going to wind up having to do probably more with less. And so
Yeah.
you're really going to need to make sure you can optimize the colleagues that you have and that they are fully aligned with the company mission, aligned around how to go ahead and drive value for clients. They understand the role that technology plays in helping them solve problems for clients or deliver an output or components. There's a lot of fear around technology replacing
Yeah.
employees. It's more likely that it's going to be integrated with work than replacing work. Work will look very different, but it's more around that. So the question becomes for employers is, how effective are you and your organization at taking technology and taking a workforce and kind of seamlessly putting them together to go ahead and drive the outcome, as opposed to thinking about the technology is going to replace all of the work.
Hmm. And I get, so there are two kind of sub themes that I wanted to touch on. One is just around health in the United States, because I think that plays a major part of it. I think right now 40% of Americans are considered obese, with another 10% considered morbidly obese. So you have half the population in the United States considered obese. Obviously, one of the leading causes of heart disease. It's just, it kills you, for lack of a better word. So it seems like this idea of health, and maybe this is why there's been such I think, a big trend towards health, right? There are so many people that are talking about eating healthy, so many people talking about saunas and cold plunging and trying to do all these different things to be healthy. You have people like RFK Jr., who's out there with his Maha movement. So it seems like there's and I don't know if we're making a dent in it yet, but it collectively seems like there's more of a push towards getting people to be healthy. And I suppose one of the byproducts of that is you're going to have people who will be able to be in the workforce longer, people who will be able to, So how connected is the idea of just being healthy on an individual level, exercise, eating healthy, to the workforce? Because oftentimes we don't necessarily connect those dots, but at least with the three things that you mentioned for the workforce population, it seems like that would be a huge factor there. And maybe that's why so many companies are investing so much in these health programs, fitness, training, healthy food on site, gyms on site. I mean, is that connected?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think it's connected. Preventative care and this concept of keeping a healthy society, let's call it that, to be able to keep people in the workforce, to be able to make sure that they can continue to contribute to growth is a key factor. A lot of it goes back to that access and the cost of healthcare that I hit on a little bit earlier, because about half of all Americans get their health coverage through their employer, so it's typically something that's paid for by the employer. right? So really something that they're focused in on is A, from a cost perspective, because it's something that could spiral fast, but B, how do I keep the workforce, a more limited workforce, engaged and focused on those type of programs. I absolutely agree with that. And I think we're seeing lots of different ways that people can think about how to impact and see and get people either care faster or early on so it doesn't become a really long-term chronic issue to keep them in the workforce, but also to keep the person more healthy and to keep the costs down. You're seeing more and more focus like telemedicine. We've seen a lot of virtual visits. I think most of us have seen urgent care show up in many parts of the country that have
Mm-hmm.
dramatically increased access to where someone can get seen much, much faster and get them to quality care from that perspective. And a key
Yeah.
component is that.
And then the other piece that I wanted to touch on is labor force participation rate,
Mhm.
which I believe in the United States, what are we, like 62-ish%? Looking at a lot of other countries, the OECD average is somewhere in the mid 70s. Sweden, for example, is almost 90%. And I feel like that's been also a challenge in the States here, right? Is getting people to participate in the workforce. Have you been having conversations about that? I mean, do you have thoughts on kind of the labor force participation rate? And I'm assuming it's also connected to health. I mean, I was pulling up some stats here earlier that even for prime age males, that they used to have in the mid 1950s, it was 97%. By 2024, it was 88%, and for all men 16 plus, currently it's 67%. So between the 1950s to today, we had it seems like a 37 or 30% drop in male participation rate specifically. Which, I mean, these are all, I suppose, somewhat disturbing trends that all play off of each other. What are your thoughts on just kind of the participation rate and what we're seeing there?
I think the way we would work on it with clients, right? So as opposed to doing like government, so we don't do really government macroeconomic type thought process around how we would do that. How we would think about with clients is trying to make sure that if we think about um, the colleague value proposition, the employee experience, making sure you've got the right people have the right skills for the right roles at the right time with the right pay, that they can go ahead and get the right opportunities. That's really where you're more focused in around at an employer level at how do I make sure I have the right workforce, whether or not that's uh, a certain age male or do I have the people who have the right skills
Yeah.
to go ahead and move my business forward. So that's really where I would say I'm more comfortable spending my time around kind of how do we make sure that we've got the right experience for colleagues and make sure that that focus is getting maximum output, maximum purpose, and leaning in for that extra mile because we do kind of lose sight of the fact that a highly engaged workforce can make a big difference for an employer
Yeah.
at trying to, win out in terms of trying to be more creative, more innovative, more team oriented, more client focused. We hear about it at a lot of employers that really focus in on that front because they feel like it's their colleague base takes care of their clients better.
Hmm. So it seems like employee experience is a big topic of conversation that a lot of your clients are coming to you with.
Yeah, employee experience is definitely an area that
Yeah.
many colleagues are focused in on. We just recently released an employee experience report that really focuses a bit more in on kind of that holistic opportunity around creating growth opportunities for colleagues, supportive work environment. I don't think I think it's probably a mixed perspective on when we talk to employers about how satisfied they are with their employee experience efforts. It's
Hmm.
probably a little bit less than half say they're dissatisfied with them. So let's call it right in that middle range. Um, And then about little, similar, like 40-ish% say they're really pleased with them, right? So it's kind of like one of those things that you're either feel like you're doing really well, or you feel like you're really not doing well at all. There's really not a lot of middle ground is kind of what we see. And clients then think about how do I want to dramatically change that to try and drive more value for my employees, because I think that's going to get me a solid ROI in return for my business, or who has already been on that journey and how we're thinking about it before.
CHROs just like you have been telling me that they want a community of their peers, but specifically focused on the future of work and employee experience. I've been hearing this for around 10 years, and now I'm finally putting something together. It's called Future of Work Leaders. It's a collection of 100 of the world's top CHROs moving beyond traditional HR, specifically focused on the future of work and employee experience. I took everyone's feedback. I heard what CHROs just like you wanted. They don't want to spend a ton of money. They don't want speeches. They don't want upselling or cross-selling. They don't want any fluff. They just want to connect with their peers to focus on strategy, on insights, and on solving real-world problems, and on helping their organization become future-ready. So if that sounds like something you are interested in, check out futureofworkleaders.com. You'll be joining CHROs from brands like Dow, Lego, Neiman Marcus, Johnson & Johnson, and dozens of others. Again, it's futureofworkleaders.com. I can promise you, you will be glad that you checked it out, and I hope to see you in there. Yeah, even with those well-being programs, and I'm curious to hear what you think on this, do you think that we've gone a little overboard in some situations? And what I mean by that is I talk to a lot of whether CHROs or CEOs and have ended up working with a lot of these organizations. And I find that, there needs to be a healthy balance between what an organization provides versus the accountability that an employee has. And so I always use the example, right? I mean, if you have an employee who works for you and they don't eat healthy, they don't exercise, they just stay at home and watch TV all day, they don't go outside, and then they show up and they say, "Hey, Pat, I'm disengaged, I'm lonely, I can't manage my money, and I'm, fix my problems for me." At a certain point, there needs to be, hey, you're an adult, you probably have a mortgage, you probably have a car payment, maybe you have kids, right? How do you balance the tough love, hey, you're an adult, you have to learn how to do some of these things yourself, with we also want to create an organization where we can help you, but not necessarily do things for you. You know what I mean? Like, companies shouldn't have to be the new parents for their employees. And sometimes I wonder that with some of the programs, whether it's well-being, whether it's, whatever these programs are, that we're doing so much that we're not teaching employees how to take care of themselves, which I think is very important. Like if I have two kids, if they're struggling and they have a problem or they're trying to figure something out, I don't just go in there and solve the problem for them. I don't just go in there and give them the answer. You got to let them struggle a little bit. You got to let them figure it out. Maybe you coach them a little bit, give them some feedback and advice, but you don't do the thing for them.
Right.
And I feel like in today's world, so many organizations are trying to do the thing for their employees, not necessarily out of bad intention, but you know what I mean? Like, how do you draw that line between what the company should provide versus the accountability that the employee should have?
Yeah. The way I think about this is companies who recognize their role as the likely most trusted institution in that employee's life, right? So in pretty much all surveys we do, the most trusted institution that people feel is from their employer, right? So that's I think the first base spot we have to start with, right? I'm not talking about parents, right, from a family perspective, but if we think about governments or we think about church, that kind of stuff, organizationally, institutions, most people feel the most trustworthy one is their employer. I think a lot of that has to do with this concept that I go to work. I do work I work each week, even if it's an hourly job or an executive job. And at the end of the week, I've got my benefits, I've got my pay, and we've built up that long-term trust relationship that I know what I get when I walk in. I do these certain tasks, and in return, we've kind of got this harmonious relationship going, however long it's been going on. So I think that's the first part. And where employers have started to go with this, and we do a lot of this with how we think about voluntary benefits, which is kind of really what you're talking about when you think about wellness and making sure that you've got access to, to certain types of insurance and making sure it's negotiated well for you, or you think about pet insurance or something like that. Even
Yeah.
like, where do I go for that? And yes, you can go online and go to the internet and try and research it yourself, but so many employees value the perspective of this employer because it's a valued, trusted institution for them. And I
Yeah.
think many employers have really embraced that role with their colleague base because it keeps that employee value proposition, that loyalty back and forth. Because our best employees, all employers want their best employees. They want their employees to continue to lean in, go the extra mile, really help their teammates when there's a time of challenge that we need to work through, help clients, be very customer centric. So I think a lot of employers have tried to find their way to I don't want to say take advantage, but to leverage the fact that they've got this relationship with the employee, and they continue to build on that. And I think
Yeah.
that's where a lot of this has come from, of provide gym memberships and do those types of things to employers as this trusted
Mm.
institution.
Yeah. So, but do you agree that there should be some kind of balance there between the accountability of the employee versus what the company offers?
Of course. I mean, it
Yeah.
has to be much like if we think about the relationship before. We were talking about, I was talking about pay, right? And I go to work and I get pay. Like the expectation should still be that the colleagues are going to do the roles and responsibilities that they're held accountable to, and to kind of go and do that. So we're making sure that they're enabling their colleagues to go ahead and develop. So if I think about, like, one of the things we talked about earlier was retirement, the retirement gap due to longevity, right? People living longer and people running out of money. So a big area that we've tried to focus in on with employers is, how do you think about education?
Mm.
Also leaning on this component that you're a trusted institution. You're not something online trying to cold call them and selling them, but how do you think about financial wellness and educating them on how to manage a budget and things like that? Now, it's still enabling them to do it themselves. You're not going to manage their money for them, but are there pieces that you can go in and lean in and help them, especially in the things that are most impactful to them? Their health, their money. Many times that's to do with family, and we think about EAP programs that are put in place to help with planning elder care. If you're in that generation, you've got to think about that for your parents. Many organizations have set up ways to go ahead and think about how to do childcare or emergency childcare or something like that if something comes up.
Yeah.
This component of building on that relationship, but it should certainly be about enabling the person to help themselves.
Okay. All right. Let's transition a little bit to the topic of AI, and it's
Mhm.
still very related to a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. Maybe high level. Are you an AI optimist, or are you on the doom and gloom worry side? Like, what is your general perception on the impact that AI will have in the workforce?
I would definitely put myself on the side of, I'm the optimist, and I'm on the optimist
Okay.
side for a bunch of reasons on that.
Yes. Tell me
Um,
why.
One would be, so the way you, especially when you phrase the question, right? You phrase it about the workforce.
Yes.
So I think that AI and technology in general. We could talk about, if we want to go back 2 generations before current generative AI and go to machine learning. We've started to find ways to take technology and help employees do their jobs either better or faster, or sometimes it takes away a good part of the work that it is, because it can be automated. But that's not many times, right? Usually it still becomes about, how does the person interact with the job? And I do think that there's going to be tremendous opportunities to leverage, let's use technology more broadly, to leverage technology to enable people to go ahead and work longer.
Hmm.
Because I'm tying it back almost to longevity, right? If you think about it, like, it will enable people in their current job, and it very well might enable people who have different skills as they start to think about what's their second or third act or fourth career as they get closer to retirement age. And maybe if they used to do a more physical manual job and no longer their body is able to do that, is there a way technology can help enable them either do the similar job longer with lifting things that they can't lift themselves,
Yep.
or do they have certain skills in their role from their experience? I'm sorry, that can be applied to a role a bit differently to where they can find a different way to add value that they wouldn't have had before. They can't write code, right? They never learned how to do that, but maybe you don't have to learn how to write code in order to really be able to help in product management of construction software equipment because you understand the industry so well and the code can be written and you're more of a product support person or something like that. And
Yeah.
AI is able to do a bunch of the technical things that you weren't able to do or technology, but you'll be able to provide the pieces that are there. So I'm
Yeah.
definitely an optimist, but I do think we're going to have to change the way we work. And that's not only the people, that's the employers too have to think about the work itself versus the technology, right? So the way I like to talk about it is kind of like work backwards
Okay.
approach versus tech forwards approach, right? So many times they take the technology, what can the technology do? Well, the technology is trying to accomplish a task. We're trying to accomplish a job. Jobs will likely look different in the future, but there's still a bunch of skills and tasks and activities that have to be done. And the biggest dissatisfaction I think we see right now with people trying to integrate technology into work is they're not redesigning the
Mm.
actual work that has to be done. They're just
Yeah.
overlaying new technology that's supposed to be more productive, which would be more productive if you thought about how should I reconstruct this role that interacts with the technology. But if you don't reconstruct the role and you just insert the technology, you don't get any productivity savings. You don't keep employees satisfied because now they've got this technology that's making their work very clunky and kludgy. It's just not working very well. And honestly, they feel threatened by it, not
Yeah.
realizing that actually 60% of their role is still going to be there. This is going to do 40%. They'll be able to do a bit more and it'll work more harmoniously and it'll work well for them. I think that's the key piece is to think about the jobs and the work that needs to be done as opposed to just institute the technology.
So when you say redesigning work, what do you mean? I guess so you said right now it feels like a lot of companies are kind of bolting AI and technology onto stuff. They're not making changes to workplace practices, but what they need to do is make changes. So what does the bolt on look like and what does the changing to workplace practices look like? Just so people listening and watching have a sense of the difference between those two things.
Yeah. So the way I would talk about it is I'll talk about it as deconstructing a job, right? We'll talk about that in a second. So just envision that you're working in a loan processing unit that you're going to go ahead and bring technology into. And basically you've got you got 500 or 1,000 people who work inside this process, well defined, right? You've been doing it for years. And you go ahead and bring automation in that's going to go ahead and do some of the keying, do some of the double checking, maybe move things from one system to the other, right? Because there's 3 or 4 systems that you're using and you've got to transcribe it over. It's going to do certain components like that. If you just insert that into the process and go, now let's make this, we used to have 500 people do this. We should be able to do it with 400 people and take 400 people out and don't change the work. You now have 400 people who feel like they're doing more work than they need to do because the
Yeah.
technology is not in there. So let's go to how I would think about that. Instead, let's work backwards, right? So let's deconstruct the job. So we deconstruct that job down to a series of tasks and skills that need to be done. So the original request comes in. We think about what needs to be done, and from a task perspective, we look at the skills that need to take place to be able to do that task. First off, you might be able to do that with a different person than you did before, right? So if we think about it, maybe we needed somebody who had all these skills before, and hence had a cost up here. And now, actually, we've done a third of the tasks have been done by automation, and we could wind up reskilling the job and doing it with somebody with a little bit less experience or something like that. There's a benefit that comes in there. But the second piece is the job. Then what you do is you reconsolidate you look at what are the tasks that still need to be done, rebuild them back up, and reconstruct that job as a different job. It's just not the same as it was before. It might be 2 or 3 jobs put together because the
Yeah.
first 3 steps of the process, because technology is going to do 30% of the work, and now I'm going to need less people. I'm going to need different people, and now you're going to have an experience where the employee will be much more satisfied in that work because the process has been designed to interact with the technology the entire time. And that's kind of how we would see. We've done projects with clients to date where we've started to think about how do you deconstruct a job all the way down to the skill level? How do you rebuild that up? And how do you take a really complicated process that maybe has several thousand people in it and kind of find ways to make it A, more efficient and productive for the organization, but B, for the colleague also to make it work like it's supposed to work and they feel fully productive in what they're doing.
Okay. Yeah, that makes more sense. Um, so when you think about the role that AI will play, there's obviously a lot of different areas it can play, whether it's reskilling, upskilling. When you look at the current state of AI, ChatGPT 5 just came out, Grok 4 just came out. There's going to be Grok 5 soon. By the end of the next year, who knows what ChatGPT and Grok version we're going to be on. What are you seeing in terms of the progress and the impact? Because I know that in the kind of the investment and the economy community, so to speak, there's still a lot of debate around whether or not the massive investments in AI are going to result in the productivity gains that so many people are thinking. Like if you look, for example, at a lot of the stock market today, a lot of the stock market growth, not completely, but a lot of it is coming in the Magnificent Seven, the Apples, the Nvidias, the technology companies. And so there's billions and billions, probably even getting close to $1 trillion being poured into AI in every single capacity that you can think of. But it doesn't seem like the productivity gains are there yet. And you made a point earlier about GDP, right? That's one of the, Scott Bessett's 3-3-3 plan where he said, inflation should be below 3%. We should have GDP growth 3%. What was the third three? I can't remember the third three. Somebody can look that up. But
Job
we're not.
growth.
Yeah, maybe it was growth. Yeah. But we're not quite there yet. I mean, do you think we will get to those massive productivity gains that are promised with AI, or is this just a lot of hype? Where do you think?
I think I kind of was hitting this before. I think the winners in this area will be the organizations that can really think about and figure out how to think about the work and
Okay.
rethink about, like, we have worked with clients who have found significant savings in time, but they have to think about the work itself. They don't think about the technology. The technology's there, but you have to if you never redesign the actual work that's being done, it is very hard to go ahead and get any of the enhancements that you're really focused on and you're really able to get.
Yeah.
You can't transform in in the AI age without the workforce, right? You're just not going to be able to do it. But that doesn't mean it won't. Workforce won't be the exact same way it was before. But you have to think about, how am I going to integrate those two things together? At least that's certainly what we're seeing, and it's how we're approaching it internally.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe that's an interesting point to make is that you won't see the productivity gains if you view technology as a bolt on. You really will only see the gains and the impact when you redesign kind of the core elements of work.
To redesign the work, absolutely.
Yeah. So if you leave your
Deconstruct
job,
it down and redesign the work, absolutely.
yeah. So how do you begin to do that? Because I think that's an important point where if you leave your job and your function the same, whether you're in loan processing, whether you're in customer service, and you're still doing everything the exact same way, but now maybe you have AI to help you with a script or something like that, but the rest of the process is the same, you might not see necessarily those productivity gains or those cost savings. So to redesign the work, is there a process that you go through? I mean, it seems like Elon Musk's first principles element here would make sense, right? Break everything down to its core fundamental units, start from the very basic building blocks. And as if you were building that job from scratch, what would that look like with AI and with technology kind of as the foundation? Um, how do you do that? Because a lot of people listening and watching this, they're going to say, "All right, I love that advice, Pat. How do I redo and rethink my job?"
So first off, you have to find the right job. You have to find the right processes and the right jobs to think about it first. So first thing we're working with clients is you got to find things that go at scale, right? So trying to find this in small itty bitty pieces is going to be challenging. right? So you're trying to look at your major processes that require lots of handoffs between technology and people, that have the most significant piece of work. The next thing you're doing is you're focused on identifying all of the skills. So you look at all the jobs that currently do this work. You're identifying all of the skills that
And
go
when you
into
say
all
jobs,
those
you
jobs.
said jobs that have the highest relationship between people and technology, right? I think is what you said.
Yeah, and have you have scale in it. You have a lot. You have volume. But besides having the fact that you've got a lot of interaction back and forth,
So
think about
a lot of people doing the job.
you have, yes, you got, you're fundamentally, it's one of those things of where do you have in an organization that's got 20,000 people, where do you have
Yeah.
4,000 and 5,000 people in a workflow versus 1,000 people? Let's start there, right?
Yeah,
That's
that's a
kind
good
of
idea.
a first
Yeah.
component is start where you have scale,
Okay.
right? So you start where you have scale. The next thing you're fundamentally doing is you're thinking about the jobs that make up all of that all of that work that will go on, and then you're starting to break those jobs down into what are the tasks that need to be done and what are the skills that are there that make up those that are needed to make up those tasks. So these are all things that are like there's government databases like ONET and stuff like that that you could use for part of this type project. This is type of work that we would do with clients, right? It's
Yeah.
we've got rubrics and architectures around what are the skills and competencies that go into all the different jobs. So you start to think about it from that perspective and break it down. And then you try and find ways to where you have jobs and tasks and skills that work together. And you find out which tasks are going to come out with automation. And then you start to logically work through and rebuild the jobs. Fundamentally, it comes down to then. You're like, okay, how do I combine these back together? How do they work in the process to where I can rebuild these back up? Because they will eventually go back to being a job. It'll
Yeah.
be a different number of jobs than you had before. It'll be a different construct than you had before. And then you need to think about what are the skills of the people? What are the skills for those jobs? Did it change how many I need? Did it change where I need them? Does it change where I attract them from? Does it change how I develop them? Like, can I grow people to do this job, or am I only going to buy people to do this job? Is there a feeder pool, or is this the entry level? Because now
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
down to task level. How does it change how I pay the rewards for the job? Can I pay it? Do I pay it differently? Is it a more valuable job? It might be a more valuable job than it was before because all the lower tasks got automated, and now you have a fewer people, but they're actually only doing the high value task, and you might have to think about how that job gets paid differently. I don't.
Yeah.
I can envision scenarios where they're paid less, and I can envision scenarios where they're paid more,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Based upon what the type of work is for the client,
And
and how it
who
fits
should
into the
be
process.
so who should be involved in this process? Is it just kind of the leaders teaming up with the employee? Do you bring in IT in here? Is HR in here?
I think
Like how do you
So HR is in there, typically consultants. Honestly, or people who specialize in organizational design and transformation are typically involved. So I think these are not skill sets that are terribly uncommon inside of large organizations, as long as they're pointed correctly and they think about how to do. They probably start with the right rubrics, right? I'll
yeah.
call it. You're familiar with rubric, right? So the
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
the right methodology off of um, what are the tasks that make up this job? What are the skills that make up that job or that make up that task? Where do I find them somewhere else? And how do I put them together in a simple way to be able
Hmm.
to combine things together?
And this is probably a never-ending process, right? I mean, you go from job to, different jobs, different tasks, new technologies that emerge, new like it's just I suppose it's kind of like an ongoing, what would you call it? Not a job audit, but an ongoing, yeah, maybe a job audit, an ongoing job audit where you're constantly, and maybe it's an HR division within HR where it's constantly just kind of rethinking how jobs get done, the functions that are required, and kind of re-putting them together on a regular basis with, technology embedded.
Yes, I would say the answer to that is yes, but you have to make sure that if you're going to go back to go take another bite at the apple, that the apple's still big enough for you to go get the value out of. Right? Remember this whole
Oh,
premise I started with
yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah.
You got to start with something at scale. And if you found a way to get most of it out, you could go back and you find these small, you find iterative changes, but you might be better suited I was at the 5,000 ones. I've got a whole bunch of 700 person families. I'm actually better off going and pivoting here and figuring out if I
Yeah.
can redesign that job family than getting small iterative changes out of this other redesigned job already. It will depend, right? Is what I would say. It depends on how
Yeah.
much
Yeah. Yeah.
information is going on. If you're, how much new technology is coming in, how much you're able to, if you think about data coming in and, like your ingestion technology right now, maybe only is able to do, it's not really able to do unstructured data well enough to where you get
Yeah.
enough out of it. But in 2 years, you feel like, our ingestion tool is so good that unstructured data and reading things from just PDFs and forms that come in and just random text, I feel like I can get more and I'm going to get
Mhm.
more value. I'll get enough value in return for it. Then you can go in and look at it again.
Okay. Maybe one last kind of two-part question to wrap up. One is on the side of what do you think is hindering companies? Because to me, it seems like a lot of the time we have the technology, right? I mean, ChatGPT 5 is great, Grok 4, the heavy version, great. A lot of the technologies are there, but it seems like on the cultural side, there's a lot of challenges, right? There's a lot of issues around trust. There's a lot of issues around knowing, how is AI making its suggestions and recommendations. There's a lot of challenges around fear of outsourcing our critical thinking to AI. I always say that one of my fears is that we sort of just become the physical manifestations of whatever the AI is. So AI tells us what to say and we say it. We go in there to ask for feedback and then we just say it at the meetings. We copy and paste the information for the emails. So, so kind of the two parts there is where do you think we are on the culture side as far as embracing the AI and being comfortable with that? Um, and then maybe kind of the follow up to that is just the progression that we're seeing with AI. Is trust going to be a challenge there? Like, do you envision a world in, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5 years where we have agents as our coworkers? Everyone's just using AI. It's just part of, we have bots walking down the halls that we're getting coffee with. Like where is this going? And is culture and trust a hindrance for us to get there?
Yeah. First part of that question was around embracing AI and why do we think that potentially clients or companies are challenged and delayed and why we're struggling to actually see the meaningful impact. Absent all the other things I've said already around, the approach you take, I think one of the big challenges that you run into, that even as the leader of a large organization run into, is there are so many opportunities in front of us. So the premise of really being able to, this concept of prioritization across something that most of us just aren't familiar with enough yet to understand really how it works. Most of us the decision makers got to these senior level roles in the organization through some level of expertise and understanding clients and understanding process and understanding the level of with a certain level of certainty, what to do in certain situations. And this technology is relatively new. We're not native to it. It's relative. We're uncomfortable with it, right, to some extent, off of
Yeah.
understanding it fully, and we're more used to understanding things in full before we go ahead and make decisions. I think that's a component of it. But the second part of it is this component of prioritization, and try with it moving as fast as it is, understanding where to go, where to point it, where we'll get the scale benefit we think we need. It'll have the most impact for clients. It'll have the best impact for cost. It'll have the least amount of impact on our colleague base that we want to impact the least. It has the least amount of unforeseen consequences. Those types of things that we just weren't prepared for because, and you hit it on it, because of the pace. Because you said, well, now we're at ChatGPT 5, and who knows what 5.5 or 6 or 6.5 or 7 look like.
Yeah. I
I
think in
think to
this
some
year
extent,
alone, didn't we start earlier this year with three? I can't remember. I thought we had ChatGPT 3 earlier this year, and in a span of 6, 7 months, we went from 3 to 5, and the year's not even done.
right. So the speed, so this component of prioritization and being able to work at a speed that we're just not no organization is really able to move fast enough that keeps up with the latest in technology. So this component of prioritization, I think, is a big piece. And I think that probably answers the progression component too, right? This just this comfort of where do we think that progression that will wind up with AI? I don't think I wouldn't even try to claim to understand where it might wind up because of the pace that it is accelerating and the impact that it is able to make. So I think the best example here is you just have to stay, agile.
Yeah.
You got to be nimble. You've got to be open to new ideas. You have to really understand where the risks are and what you're willing to take a little bit of risk on and flex, and where you go,
Yeah.
this is core to who we are, and I can't take that type of risk because it's not perfect, right? We're also used to working with technology that when you code it unless there's a bug, it's always right.
Yeah.
And there's a component here of, it's
Not everything's going to be perfect.
not everything's going to be perfect. So it's not designed for so you have to think about where you use it in your
Yeah.
workflow to where are things where human error kind of comes up to and it works in, and I still got a human in the loop later on that will pick up that this is way off, but I've maybe been able to figure out how to get a lot of the analysis done, and then you'll figure out that that recommendation just doesn't make any sense. So I'm gonna pretty much be able to understand where there's probably a flaw.
A lot of exciting times ahead indeed. Pat, let people know where can they go to learn more about you, Mercer, anything that you want for people to check out.
Yeah, so obviously www.mercer.com, where you'll be able to find all the information about things like now that we've been talking about here, where we're helping clients around their human capital challenges, how they can leverage technology in the work, the challenges that come up from an aging world and population, and the impact it's having on their healthcare, their access, their cost, or even on how to think about retirement. And that's how you can see everything with me and my 23,000 fellow colleagues who are out there helping our tens of thousands of clients every single day, trying to go ahead and move their businesses forward. So thanks so much.
Sounds good. Yeah, Pat, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I really appreciate it. And thank you to everybody who tuned in, who's listening, who's watching, and I will see all of you next week.
All right. Thank you, Jacob.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Future Ready Leadership. If you want to get access to more content on how you can become future ready, make sure to subscribe to the newsletter. It's thefutureorganization.com/newsletter. And if you enjoyed this episode, please send it to somebody who you would like to see become a better leader. Thanks for listening or watching, and I will see you next time.